Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of No Turning Back. We're excited to welcome Norah O'Donnell to the podcast this week. You probably know Norah as the anchor of CBS Evening News and a regular contributor on 60 Minutes. Norah is only the third woman to anchor one of the primetime evening news programs. She's interviewed heads of state, history makers from around the world. She has a career of her own investigative journalism. She's really top of her game, best in class, and she now has this seat that many in her field think is one of the most important in the business. We thought this episode would be so important right now because as leaders, truth and fact are critical. What is actual truth on the ground? What is falsehood? What is in the gray area in between and needs to be proven? We would argue, Stan and I would, that you can't lead people unless you first agree on what is true. You have to understand the truth of the mission, the focus of the organization, and you have to understand how to connect raw, real-time intelligence in the military up through the system that then makes sense of it and turns that raw insight into usable knowledge and separates that which isn't true. May have seemed true in the moment, may seem true to some parts of the organization, but is not verifiable, right? And so there are sophisticated systems in the military for doing this, in industry, business intelligence models, and I would argue that journalism plays a key role for us in how we run the nation and communicate as a population. Right now, regardless of which side of the aisle you may sit on, it's hard to argue that there isn't a crisis of truth or a common understanding of what fact is and is not. And Norah, I can't think of a better person to help explore that discussion. Today we talk about how she navigates that question as a journalist, how she interviews people in order to draw out honesty, and how she builds trust and confidence with her audience as well as with those who she interviews. But we also talk about Norah as a leader herself. As the executive editor of CBS Evening News, she leads a staff as an executive as well as being the face of the franchise. So she explains her leadership philosophy on that point as well. I think you'll see what Stan and I saw in this episode. Norah O'Donnell is a rare leader. She has the ability to cut to the essence of an issue and communicate what is most important. And that's a skill that all of us as leaders need to constantly work on. So we hope you enjoy this episode at No Turning Back with Norah O'Donnell. Norah, thanks for the time. And can we spend a little bit out of the gates talking about the idea of leadership in your space, in big media, right? So you've come up through the ranks over many years, and you're now in this unique position at the head of one of the major mainstream media outlets. Which is both as a job to report the news, but then you personally have taken on a leadership role there as well. Can you talk a little about you personally, what that has felt like to make that pivot and have to wear those two hats?
It is an awesome responsibility because the CBS Evening News is the longest running evening news broadcast in America, more than 70 years. And certainly there was a time when there were just the three broadcast networks and the evening news was, universally watched. It was a place where you sat down maybe on a dinner and turned on the TV or after dinner, and that's where you got your news every day. And so, when I sit in this chair, I think about those that have sat in this chair before me, including Walter Cronkite, who sat here for more than 2 decades and was known as the most trusted man in America. And so that's a tradition we want to continue here, that the audience will trust us. And we know that trust is not given, it is earned. And it's earned every day in the type of stories that we tell and how we tell them, and that we don't share opinion, we do it based on facts. And we try and foster understanding at the end of the day. I think that you think about all of the news that comes at you now in what is now a vast media landscape where many people have a computer in their hands, a tablet that gives you alerts all day long with a bunch of headlines. Well, is there a place that you can come to at 6:30 at night on the East Coast where you can sit down and say, all right, I trust the team at CBS News. I trust Norah O'Donnell and the many journalists that work at CBS News to curate a broadcast that puts it all in perspective. And that helps me understand exactly what's going on, not only in America, but around the world and with the awesome powers of our government. And so it is an awesome responsibility, as I mentioned. And, we take our role as leaders in the news industry very seriously. And we want to continue that role because I do believe there has to be somebody that stands up for the truth in journalism. And to just quote Walter Cronkite again, because I've read his biography and I do look up to him. He said journalism is what we need to make democracy work. We do. We need an informed electorate. And I think that journalism and the type of broadcast journalism that we do every day is needed now more than ever.
Can you build on that a little bit from your personal perspective? To come up through, what's interesting about the media, the mainstream media, for sure, to your point, like there's only a certain number of people that have sat literally in that chair, right? And it's that feeling is similar in the military. And every commander of the 18th Airborne Corps can tell you who commanded prior, right? All the way back to their legacy in the world wars, et cetera. Same thing inside of specialized units, although they're younger, growing up in the SEAL teams. You knew every person that ever commanded SEAL Team 2, for example. What did that feel like for you personally when you realized I'm now in this seat and I have to lead this organization, not only communicate with our audience, to your point there, but there are people now in this institution that look at me as a leader?
Yeah. Well, there are many facets of it. Leading this organization, you think about the product and the work that we do every day. It has to be A++ quality. That's what I say every day. We need and want people to continue to trust us in broadcast journalism. So the quality of our product needs to be just about perfect. And I know that that's a tough standard to meet, but that's the standard we try to meet every single day because we take it that seriously and we are capable of doing that. And that's in everything we do. And that extends to not only the audience that we want to make sure that they can trust us because of the product we put out every day, but the people we interview should also trust us. And so, part of what, I'm able to interview, whether it's now, President-elect Joe Biden for 60 Minutes, or I've interviewed the House Majority Whip at the time then, Steve Scalise, one of the most conservative members of the House of Representatives, who was nearly killed on a baseball field, who invited us into the hospital room with him to see his recovery, or to have the only interviews with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, so that it's not just the audience that trusts us, but the people we interview know that we're going to ask fair questions. We'll ask hard questions, but we're going to handle it in a way that is respectful. And, I think ultimately the audience respects that as well. You asked about, leadership. So the work product, that's the work product part of it. And then there's just the personal part of it, taking care of everybody that works on this broadcast and making sure, and certainly in the era of COVID, when we don't all see each other anymore, that was something that was a new challenge for everyone, because for younger people who live alone or older people who work in this broadcast who live alone and work at home, it became very isolating for many people. And so there were many times on our daily conference calls, we said, call your colleagues, reach out to one another, check in with everybody, because that was a new element of that. So I think, there's a shared mission on this broadcast to do A+ journalism and work. But we also are a family, and we also try and take care of each other. So those are the two leadership sides, I guess. When you ask me about that question, it's not just the work we do, but it's taking care of the people that also work on this team.
And hello,
General.
just a comment. Hi, Norah. How are you? Thanks for being on today. Call me Stan, please.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm honored, and thank you for asking me.
I just want to build on the trust point that you made, and Stan, I'll ask you to sort of add your thoughts on this from your time in service and even what you see in the corporate space, but specifically the question of how do we rebuild trust, not just in the media but collectively. Throughout your career, you've certainly seen some challenges there more acutely over the last several years, and there's a host of factors there. But I know as a younger member of the service, in the SEAL teams, working under General McChrystal and other senior leaders, especially during the most trying times of the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, one of the points they always made was we can't lose trust. We can't lose trust in each other, and the American people and our civilian leadership can't lose trust in us. And there's a whole bunch, you're going to make countless decisions every single day. But if we lose that, it's going to take a long time to shore back up. Stan, any thoughts there? Because Norah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how do we rebuild that in our country.
Let me jump on it first, because I was sort of a child of Vietnam, meaning my father and brother served there. And when I was a young officer, there was this story in the military that in reality, the press is the reason we didn't come out of Vietnam the right way. I don't buy into that theory, but the reality is that really did infect the thinking of much of the military for a number of years. Then we went through Grenada and Panama, and then the first Gulf War. And then, of course, in Afghanistan and Iraq, there started to be first a honeymoon, and then it got much more contentious, and as it should be. And of course, my own career ended in an interaction with the press. So, but it really gets to the heart of how do you maintain a relationship with entities, not just the military, where there is necessarily attention, but there must also be trust.
Well, trust is the cornerstone of what we do every day. And it's the cornerstone of what I personally believe and hold dear. And it's at the heart of why I can ask someone to do an interview with me and believe that they will trust me to do a good job, that we won't misrepresent what they are doing, what they have done, what they're trying to achieve. So that is my personal belief system. And I also think it fits within the CBS News legacy of what is, original reporting and, the work of 60 Minutes. We in broadcast journalism, we don't use anonymous sources. We don't, we use double sources or triple sources. We realize that people have a motivation if they say something negative about someone in a personal sense, and that's why you have to follow it up. So all of those things are part of what is a CBS standards book that is about this thick. We follow, we source things. We don't entangle ourselves in relationships that challenge our own integrity when we report on a story, and we would publicly disclose them if we did. So there should be a tension between the press and government. It should be a healthy tension. Mm-hmm. There's a reason that the free press is enshrined in the Constitution. And by the way, they didn't make it the 11th Amendment, they made it the First Amendment for a reason, right? A check and accountability. It doesn't mean that the press doesn't get it wrong sometimes, but most of the time it's a check. And James Madison said that the press should preserve the right of freely examining public character. And that is the role that we play. And sometimes that's an uncomfortable role. But the press also does a lot of things. And as you know, exposed a lot during Vietnam and the Pentagon Papers, the Catholic Church and sexual abuse in the Catholic Church, the Me Too movement most recently. I mean, we could go on in many examples where we, as part of a democracy, believe in a free press. And it's not just this current administration with the Trump administration that has had a tension-filled relationship, although we've never been attacked in the way that we have under Trump. But, Barack Obama, that administration went after the press many times for disclosure of secrets. I was there during the Obama administration. I was there during the Clinton administration. I mean, the press disclosures led to the impeachment of a president. So there always are tensions between the press because our job is to uncover the uncomfortable. But personally, and at CBS News, we want to do it in a way that furthers understanding and holds people accountable and also tells stories that are meaningful.
Perfect.
Over your career, how have you, there's just so many changes that have taken place in the last 5 or 6 years, just in the way people consume information. And so just building on one of the ideas or facts that you presented, the way that you, as a mainstream media, still deliberately choose to invest time, resources, money, et cetera, in fact checking, in double fact checking, it comes at a cost, and how you present yourselves, how quickly you can get into a story, etc. Can you talk a little bit about that choice, especially as a leader in one of those institutions, and how important that you see that right now?
Yeah, I mean, look, journalism is under attack. Civility is under attack. Truth is under attack. And CBS News is an organization, as a broadcast journalist operation, that puts together for the evening news a 30-minute broadcast where there are lawyers who look at the scripts. There are senior producers who look at the scripts. They are fact-checked. I'm the managing editor. I'm also responsible for those scripts. And so we look at them throughout the day and say, we're not airing that. That shouldn't be in there. That doesn't sound right. We should fix that. That graphic's not correct. And so we're constantly looking to make sure that what we put on the air is accurate, because we want people to trust and know that our product is accurate. I do think it's important maybe to just pull back the curtain a little bit. I think, and the reason I say that is, I also report for 60 Minutes. And I mentioned some of the interviews that I've done for 60 Minutes. The first interview with now President-elect Joe Biden, back when he decided not to run 4 years ago because his son had passed away. That was a relationship that the vice president did with me. And he said, when I sat down, he said, I'm doing this interview with you because the note that you wrote me after my son's death has been sitting on my desk. So that was a personal connection, and I had reached out. And what I think is what many of us and my mother taught me to do is you send a condolence note to someone when something happens. But that forging that relationship was important. The interviews I've done with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, that's a relationship that was worked on for many, many years, 3 years before I ever sat down with him. So I want to pull back in the curtain and say, these are I build relationships with people that ultimately turn into interviews. And then on an interview like 60 Minutes, just to pull back the curtain, we have what would be the equivalent of your thesis, presenting your thesis. We have a whole room of people that sit through and fact check everything and make sure that nothing that goes on the air is inaccurate. That's why that 60 Minutes is the gold standard of journalism. Have mistakes been made? Yes, we are all human. And knock on wood, that has not been in one of my pieces on 60 Minutes, but certainly in the history there have been. But there's a system built up to make sure that what we do is accurate, and I think that that's an important element of leadership is accuracy, and because you can be a leader for a short amount of time, but if you want to be a leader who survives, you have to be one that does things accurately and based on facts.
Norah, as you were starting a career in something like journalism, and you were starting it now, you were just coming out of college or high school, and when you were doing it, seeing how the world of journalism has become dispersed, because anybody with a computer, cell phone now can proclaim themselves a journalist. How would you set your own moral compass, and how would you, and I'm really asking for advice for young people here, how would you pick a direction? Would you go into conventional, traditional mainstream? Would you try something different? What would you advise? Well,
the reason I chose the field that I did, I think, is partly because of how I grew up. And this will be a more long-winded answer, but I think this is wise. My parents are scientists. They believe there are empirical truths. They believe there are facts. My dad was drafted 30 years ago into the, was served in the Army for 30 years. He was drafted during the Vietnam War. He was in med school, and he served 30 years. And when, he retired, he said, I'm pretty sure I'm one of the last conscripts in the U.S. Army. Everybody else, all his friends who were doctors had already left. But my dad really loved service, and my mom really loved service. And so I grew up believing in the nobility of public service. And I believe journalism is a public service in furthering truth and understanding. I grew up in a family where there were newspapers scattered all over the house, and my mother used to underline them and clip articles. Why? Because knowledge is important. You can't make good decisions unless you have knowledge of a situation. And so I, to this day, still clip and underline newspapers like my mother. And to any young person who wants to know more, read the newspaper. Read the newspaper and then call people about it. I mean, there's an incredible wealth of information in not tabloid newspapers, in the Journal, the New York Times, and Washington Post. And then you can get a sense to how each of them covers the news differently. So I ended up, revering not only journalists, but I revered people who were powerful and made decisions. And so no matter what field they were in. And so I think journalism was a window into having a front row seat to history. And to this day, I'm grateful because I have an immense sense of curiosity, and I get to interview the most interesting people in the world every day and ask them questions that our team of people sit and say, what's really interesting? What do people care about? And honestly, there's nothing more exciting than that, to spend time
Can I follow up?
with leaders in every field, to talk to the leaders in every field.
What happens? I've always wanted to know this about interviews. You're in an interview and you're dealing with somebody who you are convinced is lying. And they're lying in a pretty frustrating kind of way. How do you handle that sort of personally, mentally, and then how do you handle it journalistically?
It's a great question. And I've always wanted to write a book called The Art of the Question, because I believe that 90% of getting the right answer is asking the right question. And that's not just true for journalists. Think about, and so we ask questions in a way we anticipate what their answer would be. At least that's the way I prepare with my team. In an instance where someone is not telling the truth, we just do appropriate follow-ups based on facts. And so sometimes you have to spend a lot of time, almost like a prosecutor, anticipating what their answer is going to be and then going back with the facts over and over again and driving towards the truth. But you have to do it in a respectful way. I can remember one time when I was anchoring CBS This Morning, Senator John McCain was on, and I had followed McCain for many times. I was a Hill reporter. I'd covered his presidential campaign and been on the Straight Talk Express with him, so knew him quite well. And he knew my mother, who did a lot with veterans. And I interviewed him live on the air one time, and I think I really started to challenge him in an aggressive way. And he later called the president of CBS News, and he complained about the way I asked the question. And I went back and looked at the tape, and I realized that my tone was off. Now, factually, I may have been correct, but my tone was wrong. And so that's something that I did change, in terms of that it's not my job to scold someone or judge someone. It's my job to illuminate with tough questioning the truth. And then the viewers can decide. Ultimately, people are really smart. They are. And I have to maintain that objectivity so that everybody trusts me, no matter what your political persuasion is, because we need those people. We need to be building trust so that there's a shared set of facts out there about what's true, what to believe, what's right.
Great.
Let me go a little deeper on that, and you should write that book when you have time.
Can I get you guys help on that? Yeah. I know it's harder than I know. Writing a book is harder, as you pointed out.
Yeah. It makes you question whether your idea is good. That's all I can say. But it's universally true. I think that there's an art there that's true in the military and in your field and in industry. There's a saying I'm going to bounce this off you to see if you would agree with this sort of model, what I'm hearing you say. In the special operations community, that you learn the better a team gets, small team, the more it plans its baseline mission. And even though the better they are, the harder the mission is going to be. And they know you're never going to execute the base plan, but you plan it out ruthlessly so that when the fog of war hits and you have to deviate, you have a base plan that everybody can return to as soon as possible. So you're constantly resetting to the base. Do you, in challenging or complex interviews, is that how you see it? Like, we're going to plan out our base model, and I, as the frontline reporter, I know when I'm deviating, and then I'm going to reset to baseline?
No, that's a great question. I mean, obviously there's infinite adaptability, which, as you know, is a hallmark of success. The baseline is that we spend so much time knowing all the facts, right? So you always know, maybe the analogy is you always know what your exit plan is or your other avenues to pursue. And so the hardest thing is to do an interview with someone who just lies and lies and lies. And I've done that before. I've and it probably the first time, and I don't want to say who, but it was maybe about 8 years ago, a congressperson who was running for president of the United States. And the interview was lie after lie. And I just felt like I couldn't even grab on. I didn't even know what to say, because never before I had been engaged in something where someone was just constantly lying. It is hard to do a fact check like that. But the way we prepare, and I'll just say it like this. Someone asked me the other day, they said, "Oh, I watched your interview with Joe Biden on 60 Minutes. So did the producers just hand you a bunch of questions and you ask them?" This was a smart person who asked me that. And the other person that was standing there said, "Yeah, but they go over them first with Biden, what they're going to ask." And I said, "No, we don't. We don't do that." And these were smart people, and who read the paper and talk with a lot of people in Washington. I said, no. For months, we talked to everybody on Biden's team. We talked to everybody on Kamala's team. We talked to a bunch of Republicans about what's going on across the country, experts in subject matter. And then we develop a bunch of questions. Then we narrow those questions. We talk through them. We decide what are the most important things. And then I go through and practice them myself and talk through them about what's ways to do that type of question. So I'm game planning, if you will, if that's the way to sort of compare it to what you do. But that the baseline is is knowledge based on reporting, and a lot of reporting, a lot of conversations and hard work that happens with producers and associate producers all behind the scenes before you see what's on television. And I'll just say, I do believe, without disparaging anyone, that's very different than what you see on cable news. Cable news is now in the business in many ways of affirmation. We're in the business of information. And I think that's a very different thing.
Interesting. One of the things this is sort of a theoretical question or philosophical question, I should say. We can't control how smart we are, but we can control how educated we are and how informed we are. And I think the two aren't exactly the same thing. There's sort of a baseline education that a person can try to have, and then there's a level of being informed about what's happening. If you were to describe someone who's educated, what kinds of things would be foundational? And then if they were going to be well informed, where would they get their information?
Well, that's an interesting question. I don't believe that you have to have, an Ivy League education to be educated. I think you just have to be an expert on your, whatever your subject matter is. I mean, you can be, a very skilled carpenter, a very skilled electrician. You can be very skilled restaurateur. You can be a skilled musician and not be interested in what the military is doing or care what's happening in Afghanistan, just because you have no nexus to that, right? So I honestly believe it's what they call deep practice, or spending a lot of time on something over and over again, that we become better and better at what we do. And so, I'm 46 years old. I've been doing this now for first as a print reporter and then journalism. You reach kind of the stage where, like, I've done this so many times. I know the rhythm of this. I know how to prepare. I know what I need to do. And you become an expert or educated in your subject matter by doing something over and over again. Now, I would say when you say educated, it means not just practicing the craft that you do, but reading about other people that also practice that craft, right?
Yeah.
So that's how I would describe it. For me, I try and just read a lot. I try and read a lot about the subjects that I interview, and I try and read as many newspapers as I can every day, and historical reference.
Norah, pivoting just a bit, you must run an incredibly disciplined calendar, the way you approach your day, your week, et cetera. Just an assumption there, given the job you have and the pressures. And I'm assuming one thing that's constantly trying to get onto your schedule is young folks in your field or others that look up to you just as a leader and a figurehead for mentorship and counsel. How do you manage those relationships? How do you choose who you're going to invest time in, and how do you approach trying to help them think through their careers?
That's a great question, and there are a lot of requests for help and mentorship and information. First and foremost, I kind of think of it like a concentric circle because there is a limited amount of time. And so I have to, take care of my family, first and foremost. I take care of my work. I take care of the people that I work most closely with, the rest of the people at work. I then take care of the network of friends and people that I have come across. And then there are the other opportunities to reach out to diverse communities and others that I may not have any prior relationship. And that just comes in the form of speeches or emails and responding to those. I think the best piece of advice I can give is don't just send an email, call somebody. If someone really wants my advice and help, if you call me or call, my assistant, I would take that call. And what I fear is that one of the most important, I have this saying, the quality of your life is built on the quality of your relationships. And we've somehow lost this ability to pick up the phone and call somebody. And that's the most important way to build a relationship. We're challenged in the COVID era of, being able to meet face to face, but a phone call is really still one of the most important ways to have a connection. So if I'd rather talk on the phone to someone who's seeking advice. And I think people who ask for advice, who say, hey, do you have a minute just for like a 3-minute call? And then, that's, of course, it's usually 15 or 30. But it's a good way to get someone on the hook. I just need a quick piece of advice for 3 or 5 minutes. Oh yeah, no problem. I'd be happy to do that. So I do think, at least in my experience too, most people are pretty willing to return a phone call. And when I reach out to people, and the same is true, if you send me the right kind of note, I'm also willing to help out and give career advice.
I'm gonna hand it over to Stan to ask a final question, but I'm just laughing at your comment because I spent a year as Stan's aide de camp, so like a chief of staff position when he was commanding the counterterrorism units. And one of the onboarding pieces of advice that I got it from Stan or someone else was nothing takes 10 minutes. A lot of people are going to want 10 minutes of the general's time. Nothing takes 10 minutes.
Right. In other words, so build in more time in the schedule, or
exactly. Don't do 6 10-minute meetings in an hour. It's just not humanly possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, Norah, I'm going to finish first by thanking you so much, not just for this afternoon, but for what you do, because I do think that, like you, but I do it from afar. I admire journalism because there's a courage in being willing to take that on, particularly in today's environment. And I think it's going to become more important as we go forward. But the personal question is, how do you keep yourself going? You mentioned you've been at this a while, you got a family, you got friends, you got responsibilities, you got a level of credibility, you've got a conviction about your responsibility to your craft. And those are all, to some degree, competing for what there is of Norah O'Donnell. How much energy you have, how much focus. How do you keep yourself? Describe sort of your day or your week and give us a sense of how you keep from keeling over.
Well, I think the older that I get, the more I realize that you have to feed your body and your mind in order to excel at a certain level. And so you have to feed it emotionally and spiritually, but you also have to feed it physically with the right kind of ingredients, fuel in, fuel out. So I'm a health nut and I exercise a lot and I engage in new practices of learning tennis and learning golf and learning how to, change the way you swing, which is really difficult, that challenge the mind. And that kind of stuff is pleasurable, right? In terms of feeding my mind. But, I sort of just have kind of a don't quit attitude. I think it was one that I grew up with, don't quit. And I think I'm just fortunate that I found myself in a career that I really enjoy. I mean, my husband says to me, he'll wake up and look over and he's like, what are you reading on your phone? And I'm like, I'm reading the New York Times. He's like, why? Like, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. What is going on? But I love it. I'm so interested. I'm just incredibly curious, And so whatever it is, whatever field, I think people that are leaders in their field or successful in their field, they have a deep love of whatever it is. You know what I mean? They love the people that they work with. They love this subject matter. They fear to have a shared mission with the people that they work with. So, that drives me ultimately, is that I just love what I do. I'm excited to read about what's in the newspaper every day. I'm excited to learn more about people who are making decisions and what they're doing. So, you've heard this, it is truly finding what you love, or finding a career that you don't mind working hard, surrounding yourself with people who share in the same mission and delight in that also hard work. And then I just think that as you get older, one of the things I just noticed, you have to truly physically and mentally take care of yourself in order to really work at a high level. And what was the thing I put on Instagram the other day? Someone said, if you're not taking care of your wellness, you'll soon be taking care of your illness, or something like that. You know what I mean? And I got a lot of feedback on that when I put that on my Instagram. Now, I just ate like 3 Reese's peanut butter cups that somebody had sent me before I came in here. So in moderation,
That's all right.
everything in moderation. Yes. But, feeding your mind and your body in a way to continue the hard work. And I hope that,
it reminds me of a card. Our first long separation, my wife and I, and we've been married for 45 years, was when I went to Korea as a young captain. And for a year, I didn't see her, didn't speak on the phone once for a year, just wrote letters. But she sent me a card one time, and I still have it now. And it said, if you do something you love, you will always look forward to the day. And if you find someone you love, you'll always look forward to the night. And
wow, you married a champion.
I did okay.
Lucky you. That is true. And I do think that, there's a lot of talk about women and leadership. And I'm only the 3rd woman in this job in terms of anchoring an evening newscast. And people talk about what it takes for women to succeed. You do have to have a partner that will truly believe in you. And I think, maybe traditionally that has come easier to men because of traditional roles. I'm able to do this job and disappear for weeks at a time because I have an incredibly supportive husband. And I think that is one of the other most important elements of success and leadership is not, we think about the team you surround yourself at your work or whatever you're doing, but also the team that you surround yourself back at home, that they're supportive of as well as what you're doing. So I'm glad your wife is sending you love notes. My husband, when I'm down, he brings me a coffee mug with Wonder Woman on it.
I love it. Norah, thank you so much.
He does bring me coffee every morning.
That's pretty good. We're not there yet. My wife won't do that.
Well, it sounds like you owe some payback after all that time away, Stan.
You're right. Exactly right.
I think you missed the message there. You're supposed to bring the coffee to Annie.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, tomorrow's a new day, Stan. Tomorrow's a new day.
I'm on it.
Norah, thank you so much for the time. This is and to echo Stan for the work you're doing. It's the most critical window in my lifetime that I can remember. So grateful for all the focus from you and your team.
No, and we appreciate both your service to our nation. Thank you.